In the intellectual community of kind and virtuous individuals who play video games, it is very rare that someone loses their cool over something mundane. However, if there is one topic that always causes the group to lose their collective minds and bicker amongst each other, is whether or not the game is good. Is the game good? Who is to say? Whenever one thinks about the game, it is often easy to sniff out if the game has bad controls. That is agreeable. It can easily be determined if the character has movements that are sluggish and slow, or quite possibly too rapid and racy. Does a game with bad controls mean it is a bad game, though? Well, I suppose. Maybe, depending on what the game is trying to be. If the game is an adventure title, primarily involving talking to other people and solving puzzles, then maybe it is so acceptable that the sparse combat is unsatisfactory because, well, look, you're on a cool adventure. Who cares if the controls are bad? Similarly, if the storytelling of the game is compelling enough, people may stick around to see more of it. Maybe if the art style is like a 3D equivalent to a painting, wouldn't one want to continue through the slog fest to see more of it? Could one say the same for a racing game, though? If one has a game whose primary gameplay loop is racing a car, should the car handle poorly, well, then the main attractor has been detracted. Why would you play the game? Many racing games have no real plot or characters or anything to latch one's attention onto, aside from the driving of the car. So if the car is bad to drive, then it must mean the rest of the game is bad. Or is it? Fast and Furious on the PS2 is the best console game to ever hold the Fast and Furious name. This is, of course, not a very difficult title to achieve. It is like saying that the McRib is the best thing at McDonald's. It is, of course, still very subpar, but compared to every other thing on the menu, it is the least bad thing on the menu. Released in the year of 2006, Fast and Furious is yet another street racing game that was released during the 6th generation of consoles. Yes, it was during this period, in the early 2000s, that you could not help but trip over games with cars that were being raced on the street. Need for Speed Underground and Most Wanted are probably the most notable examples of such a genre, an exemplary series showing what a street racing game should be. It is little wonder, then, that Eutechnyx, a studio renowned for making the McDonald's equivalent to racing games, would attempt to create a street racing game of their own. Or at least a second one, that wasn't horrifically derivative of Need for Speed. For instead, in developing Fast and Furious, they would develop a clone of the niche driving series championed by the ever-quirky Genki, Tokyo Extreme Racer. What differentiates Need for Speed and Tokyo Extreme Racer? Well, to the untrained eye, not much. In the simplest of layman terms, Need for Speed is on the streets and is thus focused on handling, whereas Tokyo Extreme Racer is on the highway and is so more focused on higher speed. Generally, grossly simplified. There are more nuances to it, but we are only here a finite amount of time in this earthly life, and I am not going to parse out the differences here in this video in excruciating detail. For I have already done that here in my groovy video talking about Japanese and Western racing games. Go watch that after you, the viewer, are done watching the current one. What really matters, then, is whether or not Eutechnyx properly translated the Tokyo Extreme Racer formula in an obviously more budget manner. At first glance, or maybe upon doing visual research just watching videos of the game being played, you could come to the conclusion that Fast and Furious does a fair job. Should you actually decide to make the unfortunate decision to play this game, however, you will soon realize that this game has the mortally wounding flaw of having a horrific handling model. Imagine you are driving a car and you turn the wheel. The car's tires, making contact with the ground, have been manufactured with a particular rubber compound that causes the force of the car acting upon the ground to not overcome the opposing force of the tarmac. This is what allows one to turn a corner without sliding. Now imagine you are driving a car in Fast and Furious and you turn the wheel. This does not happen. You just slide. Sometimes. In some cases, you don't slide at all and you take a corner. But there is also a chance that you will slide anyway, even if you took the corner the same way as you did before. That is the best way to describe this game's handling. It is inconsistent at best, undrivable at worst. The handling system brings to mind Schrodinger's cat. At what point does this handling model shift from grip to drift? Is it either or? How can one even tell? In actuality, it's both, which means it's shit handling. Ralph Nader wrote a very lengthy book in the mid-60s detailing why the Chevy Corvair was unsafe to drive at any speed, and even though he was completely full of shit then, I see now, in Fast and Furious, what he might have meant. The player can be speeding along on a straight, as one does on the Wangan race, then come across the dreaded mild turn in the road. This is a big deal. You effectively have two options. Number 1. Slow down drastically to avoid hitting the wall. I'm talking half your speed. Number 2. Wall ride and then get stuck on said wall because for some inexplicable reason the endgame physics really enjoy you having stuck to the said wall. There's not even a scientific parallel one can summarize from this. Such a physics system is bizarre. In either case, turning a corner is a very easy way to lose first place. Or it could be, if the game provided any sort of frictional challenge at all, because it does not. Every race in the game is a one-on-one battle, which is fine for this genre, nothing out of the ordinary. The only issue with such a race type is that there is no sense of progression in this game at all. Within 1 hour, the game showers you with money from these one-on-one blowout races, mountains of doubloons, and one can effectively upgrade their car to max power within that time period, thus having perpetual blowout races against a solitary AI car every time. As the game progresses, faster upgrades become available, but it is all too easy with the prize money you are now obtaining from your easy-peasy races to buy said upgrade immediately. Had it not been for the fact that I chose a rear-wheel drive RX-7 for my starting car, one could have very easily had one car throughout this entire game. But you won't, because an all-wheel drive car is a must in this title. The aforementioned inconsistent handling model that feels very similarly to a differential randomly deciding to open and close depending on how you subtly hold the controller in your lap means that rear-wheel drive cars are straight fucking useless on highway races. These vehicles are a rather simple way to face the wrong way at the slight pimple in the road. That's not to say your racing career is improved in the slightest with all-wheel drive. No, it's a band-aid, a crutch, as one may say, over what is a poorly formulated game mechanics that only gets worse when you actually try to control the slide. The Toge, or whatever the hell it's called, drift races are quite possibly the worst drifting mode I have ever seen in a racing game. One would be under the assumption that the slidey handling would be a great boon to the drifting mode, except it does not. Your goal here in the drift mode is to somehow control the handling model in the black box of incomprehensibility it is, to such an extent that you are sliding. It does not work, most of the time. In some cases, I slam into every wall that exists. In other cases, I'll do the most badass, lengthy drift you've ever seen. There is no consistency to it. There are only ways to better increase your chances of actually doing a drift, of which there are many for some inexplicable reason. Aside from the normal e-brake drift, there is a silly little clutch kick button, which I suppose simulates what it must be like to wear large boots while driving stick, as I kept accidentally hitting it and spinning out. In drift races, using this button is the most reliable way to enter a drift, although there is still maybe only sort of a 50% success rate in actually getting the tail out correctly. Rather frustrating. But what is even more frustrating is that the game has the gall to rate you on the angle of your drift. Too shallow, it won't give you points, and too perpendicular, it won't give you points either. Such an unusual addition to the difficulty, especially because hitting a wall does not remove your score. Every aspect of driving a car in this game is a mess. Now, that is not to say that this game is all bad. Yet at the same time, I cannot actually think of anything noteworthy to say about it. PS2 Fast and Furious has no vibe, it is just a realistically depicted Tokyo. There is music, I have heard it, I don't remember any of it though. The entirety of this game is just driving the car, which feels bad and is aggravating to interact with. Yet at the same time, I kept playing the game, trying to see if there was a secret to the handling I was missing. But I came to the conclusion that there was not. You can warp your driving style to mitigate a possible spin out, but at the end of the day, you are like yarn to a cat. You are going to get spun. I was watching YouTube videos of gameplay to see if anyone else had the same feelings I did, and mostly the community is in agreement. Handling is bad. Is it worth overlooking the handling for the rest of the game? Well, the strongest aspect to this title is the vehicle diversity and car customization. For a licensed movie tie-in game, there are many cars, a diverse selection, and what's more, the customization available to these vehicles is, rather splendid, or at least to the aesthetics. Body kits, spoilers, wheels, colors, liveries, it's all here and it's all rather tasteful. Considering how piss easy the game is, it's very possible to grind this game for money just to buy cars and customize them. But is it actually worth your time to slog through this otherwise rather budget game and its hokey as all hellish jank handling model to do it? For me, it's not. I really struggled with this game by the midpoint, as the events started to all become the same. The music became grating, and the magnetic walls started to become even more grinding on my psyche. It became agonizing to play it. I had to stop. I do not necessarily hate Fast and Furious PS2, but I also do not like it. Aside for dwindling nostalgia or the desire just to customize cars, there is nothing here to chase but the idea that this game could have been above average, had the cars felt right. But as it shall forever remain, it is below average, and is more or less just a travesty of the series it was trying to become a budget version of. Genki, a Japanese studio who were the creators of the Tokyo Extreme Racer series, was actually developing a Fast and Furious game. And based on the small amount of trailers and pre-release videos that the community saw, it actually, quite possibly, certainly, would have been the Fast and Furious game people actually wanted. Of course, when I say that, I mean it just looked to be Need for Speed, but with the Fast and Furious veneer, which just seems to be what people want for some reason. Even though we got exactly that with Need for Speed Payback. But I get off track. Genki was going to create the Fast and Furious game, but then it got cancelled due to general game development fuckery, and instead, Eutechnics would make a clone of Genki's own series and put a Fast and Furious coat of paint upon it. What a fascinating and leech-infested world we somehow claim to thrive in. Unless a dev kit gets released into the wild that has Genki's original game on it, we will never get to play the Fast and Furious. But you know what we can play from Genki? My second favorite racing game ever, Daytona USA on the Dreamcast. You may say to yourself, well, Hagen, you're full of shit. You said this video was about games with bad handling, not good games. Well, in the words of Billy Joel, you could be wrong and you could be right. You are right in that I said this video is about games of the racing genre with bad handling, but you're wrong in that I never quantified to what extent bad handling means. Daytona USA on a cabinet with a wheel and the H shifter is one of the greatest racing games ever made. Daytona USA on a pad is, yeah. When Daytona USA 2001 came out on the console, having a wheel was a luxury. I mean, having a wheel today is a luxury. I'm 25 years old and I haven't owned a wheel since I was, 8. Chances are, if you were a gamer back then and obtained Daytona USA, you popped this game in with a pad, a Dreamcast pad no less, and that had no other meaning than that you were in for a rough time, and you didn't even have proper internet access to why this was the case. Playing Daytona USA 2001 with no settings adjusted with the Wombat-styled pad is actually unplayable. No lies, no shits, no giggles. Steering is dummy sensitive, and any avid Daytona appreciator knows that playing this game is not for dummies. This game is difficult. Complete control of your vehicle is necessary to even beat the countdown clock, so having your vehicle twitching and thrusting in every moment is no bueno. An astute options menu selector will lower the sensitivity of the controller, but you must realize that there is still an unsatisfactory twitchiness to the car that cannot be overcome naturally. The easy way out is a wheel, and despite the strong recommendations I perpetually get for good value wheels, my hobbies ever waver. Every moment I look at a wheel to buy, the next moment I'm looking at something of equal value. Should you want to just hop into Daytona USA Raw, you need to deploy advanced controller techniques. From Software says you need the legendary armored core grip for that game. Well, here in Daytona, you gotta use the depressed stick method. Take a gamepad, hold it in your hands, appreciate it, flick off the dead skin stuck to it. Place your thumb upon the stick named after that appendage. Now press your thumb forward, vertically. You have now obtained an incredible amount of precision when playing Daytona USA. All of the gameplay you see is just me permanently having my thumb jammed to the top of the stick and then doing the steering from the top. Just applying a cantilever force on either side of the stick as normal is not precise enough, but the stick upwards in such a manner means that any left or right movement is occurring slower but more evenly, so the cars now behave as they should. It's a band-aid fix, if I've ever seen one. A wheel is a divine way to interact with Daytona, but I'm gonna be real with you, an off-the-shelf wheel on console is not a perfect way to interact with Daytona USA. All games in this series have a 4-speed transmission in an H pattern on the cabinet. This is done on purpose. The core difficulty curve to Daytona is not knowing to shift when accelerating, but instead using the transmission to slow and slide the car in curves. To exemplify this idea, I shall describe how one approaches the most deceptive corner in racing game history. The beginner course in Daytona USA is 777 Speedway. It has 3 turns. The first 2 are easy, gradual, and very high speed. The last corner, under the Sonic Rock Bust, is not high speed, even though it looks like it. No brakes, you'll slam into the wall. Full brakes, and you'll lose the race. Many a time I have seen people at an arcade approach this curve and fuck up their race, not understanding what is going on here. The actual way to make a sharp corner in Daytona is to perform a little number sequence called 4-2-3-4. Approach the corner in 4th, hit the brakes, immediately drop the car into 2nd. This causes the car to spin its tires, but 2nd gear is too slow. Immediately upshift to 3rd to keep the power on, end the drift, and then as you exit, go back to 4th. Rinse and repeat for all the tracks in the game. This unusual cornering method may seem unusual at first, but it is nonetheless what gives Daytona its identity, and most importantly makes it one of the greatest video games ever made. Yes, not just greatest racing game, greatest games of all time. Gangbusters of money was made on the original arcade cabinet version of this game. It is also the original 3D arcade racer, or at least the first actually good one. Thus, all other 3D racing games have Daytona USA to thank for their existence and prosperity. It is the progenitor, the OG, so to speak, he who came before the rest. Playing the original on the arcade today is divine. The handling still feels modern, even with the unique shifting quirk. The game ran at 60 frames per second then, and runs at 60 FPS now. The big bright jelly bean aesthetic has also come full circle. At first, having 3D graphics like this was amazing. Then maybe during the PS2 era, it was a bit dated. But now, big political, big jelly bean aesthetics are in vogue, so Daytona USA still looks good. Of course, that's all the original. I am talking about the often neglected Dreamcast version, which has been so neglected because of the aforementioned handling, which I had just had to spend an absurd amount of time describing how to fix to you, so you, the viewer, even if you don't have a wheel, can appreciate this game, for it is my second favorite racing game ever made, right behind Burnout Paradise. One may ask, why? That is simply because it provides everything I want in a racing game, or really any game for that matter. That being vibe and difficulty. Take a gander at the visuals in this game. It has the Dreamcast aesthetic. That being bright colors at low resolutions, textures trying their best to be real, yet still holding polygonal silliness. Not a hint of misery or sternness to be found. There are silly words and silly sponsors everywhere, an endless non-stop ocean all of one color, a perpetual purple horizon. Every Dreamcast game has this look, an in-between of the more realistic graphics starting to occur on the PS2 and the approximate artist illustrations on PS1. The cars are not real, but they have a cute look to them, all smooth and shiny. All have names based off of animals or cool-sounding words, and all are announced by a rather fruity man shouting their name.
Hornet, Grasshopper, Vulcan, Lightning, Unicorn, Pyewacket Barchetta, Rule of the Night, Pyewacket Barchetta Super.
Hell yeah! On track, all of the cars happily bounce ever so slightly, implying that they have stiff suspension that are bouncing along the course. Should you win a race, a cool CG appears alongside the credits of the car you won with. For the normal cars, it's just an action shot, but with these silly little German micro cars, the ending CG are these jolly little smiling men in the pit lane helping the driver get out of the car. Many people will point to an image and say it is their aesthetic. Well, here is mine. Dreamcast aesthetic. Particularly these images. Color, joy, whimsy, racing a silly car, surrounded by people who are happy for you and are all having fun watching you perform well. That's badass. But what is also badass is the soundtrack. Most certainly one of the best soundtracks in any racing game. Music is unique to each track, so some are remixes of the original Daytona USA OST, but made to sound less annoying on repeat. Others are just straight bangers, like the delightfully named Speed Friend. There is no grungy music here, only tunes to tap your feet to. Racing these jelly bean cars, watching them bounce along these whimsically designed tracks, jamming out to a guy singing the game's title next to a guitar, this game is a bop. Of course, it is not just a bop to look at, but is also a bop to play. I already covered the handling, and without adjustment, it's bad, but can be made tolerably fun on a pad or divine on a wheel, mostly. A game's handling should match the tracks. I forgot who said that, but he is right. A racing game, or any game with cars, should design its gameplay around the way the car drives, and by God, Daytona USA does that well. There are only 8 tracks, but all of them offer a unique challenge, a unique utilization of the game mechanics. Unlike Need for Speed or Grid or even Fast and Furious, you cannot just autopilot this game. You need to pay attention to the road, the track, the other cars, and of course, your time. The last corner on the beginning course is tricky to master, but now apply that to the other 7 courses in the game that are all more complex. Aside for this one, Circuit Pixie. That's just a loop. But it is the fastest course in the game, so maintaining speed is key to victory, and thus has an inherent challenge. All the other tracks, though, must be learnt, and you gotta learn them good, because the AI take no prisoners in this game, and neither does the clock. Learning a track in a sim racer is one thing, but it's relatively the same experience no matter the game. Daytona is the only game that plays like Daytona, so it has a difficulty curve for the uninitiated, but that is what makes it special. Easy to pick up and hard to master, the perfect difficulty model. It's what got me into fighting games like Guilty Gear. However, do not think for one moment that 8 tracks is too little, for there are mirror versions of the tracks, and reverse versions of the tracks, and reverse mirror versions of the tracks. Many games will have mirror tracks, some have reverse tracks, but to have both and then some is an odd case, but is a decision I really wish more arcade games had. What's more, these mirrored tracks are not like Mario versions where the words read backwards. A mirror has everything repositioned for the new track, so it visually looks new, as well as feeling new to drive on. A corner you master in one direction must be relearned in the opposite, examining for new reference points for braking, aside again for Circuit Pixie. These options, alongside the unique handling, means that there are several versions of one track that must be mastered. And you also get to listen to a new song while doing it, as playing on a mirror version of a track plays a remixed version of that track's theme. I love this game. Can you tell? It takes a while to actually become competent at Daytona, by design, as it carries on its back design elements from an arcade game that was designed to consume your quarters with difficulty, but also the desire to get better. I've played this game for 20 hours, and I'm still improving. I love playing this game. I could get a similar lap-burning experience with a sim, but does a simulator look and sound like this? No, it doesn't. Daytona USA provides me with a place I actually want to be in, and provides me with enough challenges that I continue to want to play in it. It is only a shame that so few people can actually play this game outside of an emulator, as physical copies are unreasonably big bucks, and even the original arcade game was delisted online very recently. The only legal way to play a new Daytona game is to find any of the originals on arcade, or buy a Yakuza game which so happens to have Daytona USA 2 located on it. Which is a crying shame, as anyone who has ever once enjoyed a racing game with 3D graphics needs to play this. But unless you play with the wheel, it is not a perfect Daytona experience. No matter what option one picks for this game, it is not 100% the same as the source material. Concessions are made for the sake of being a console port. In the end, however, I would argue that Dreamcast Daytona is still worth playing, no matter if you use a hokey hand grip on pad or face button shifting on a wheel. If there is any Dreamcast game I would actually like to see an HD port of, it's this game, and maybe all the other 90s Daytonas. It still looks pleasant, and the gameplay has aged like wine. Now that I think about it, any video covering a retro game almost always has at some point a comment or statement that goes along the lines of, "They should remaster this for modern consoles." I usually take comments like this with a grain of salt, particularly because if someone likes a game enough to make a video about it, they would want to see more of the game, and a remake is the best option. Or maybe they desire a remaster out of wanting to rekindle their own nostalgia and hope others will appreciate it, quite possibly wanting to refine gameplay mechanics that haven't aged so well, or maybe so their game can get a more fair shake when it previously was not well shook by the community. If someone asks for the former, a big remake, I struggle to justify it. If the game is good and one has nostalgia for it, would it not be better that the game is just, ported to new consoles at a higher resolution with bug fixes? Silent Hill 2 is a well-aged game. It's also probably one of the best horror games ever made. I don't really think it needs a full-blown remake. It just needs a port to modern hardware at a high resolution that isn't dog water so more people can easily play it. When it comes to the latter, Daytona USA fits the bill perfectly, as it was not given a fair shake in the market despite it being a banger. It was placed on an unpopular console, had a handling model mostly unsuited to the controller the console arrives with, and was released 1 month before the Dreamcast was killed in Japan and months after it was mega dead everywhere else. Again, this game needs an HD port, not a remaster, as it's pretty good the way it is. The middle option, though, a game that needs to refine its gameplay mechanics, that is a problem that has only nebulous solutions. How much can you actually change an old game before it's a different one, divorced from the original experience? Would that make the game even better? A Ship of Theseus thought experiment. One could argue what makes a remake the same as the original all day to no solution. Keeping in with the narrative here, there is one game that is not so much a remake, but a modern HD version of an old series, yet did not modernize any of the gameplay at all to varying effect.
5, 4, hey, you!
Carmageddon Max Damage is a jank-ass game. But unlike many other jank-ass games, it does not even seem as though the developers were trying, but failing to do something more grandiose. Every aspect of this game could be best summarized as individuals sitting in an echo chamber, bouncing ideas off of each other with no devil's advocate or straight man to just say no. Purpose-built jank is what I am saying. 90s PC game style jank of trying new things and just assuming that it is the best way to go about it. Fitting then that Carmageddon is a series that was born from the 90s PC era of trying new things and not knowing if what you just did was going to be the new trend or not. In case it is not obvious from its name, Carmageddon is a vehicular combat game. You take a car, enter an arena, and try to stop your opponents from stopping you. Simple as. Twisted Metal beat this game to market by a few years, but do not get the two twisted. This duo of titles have the same concept, but carry two drastically different approaches to it. Twisted Metal is basically a high-octane death arena with guns and cars and quick events. Carmageddon is the opposite. It's a slow game, with large maps holding a variety of secrets, crashing and power-up focused gameplay, and generally just having events that carry on for a damn long time. The comparisons are even more varied beyond that, however. Twisted Metal changed over the years. The combat slightly differed, handling changed, characters were swapped in and out. The last game in this series plays considerably different than the original. Conversely, Carmageddon Max Damage plays almost exactly like the original game from the 90s, but made in the mid-2010s, and carries all the baggage and oddities that such a comparison would bring up. New games have structure. You are given an objective and given the tools to perform it. Some lesser games may hold your hand for it, but nonetheless there is a particular method that an objective must be completed with. Twisted Metal is as such. You enter an arena and are expected to be quick on your feet and precise in your aiming to win a match. Carmageddon will just plop you into an event and say, do the thing, and then you just do. The best event in the game, Classic Karma, is an event where you have one objective that is achieved through 3 separate means. Win the race, destroy all the enemies, or run over all the pedestrians. There is a timer on the top of the screen, but any time one hits another car or splatters a pedestrian, your time goes up. It's rather easy to gain a cushy time pad, where upon gaining this time pad, you suddenly realize that Carmageddon is the ultimate fuck around with shit simulator. The AI are lethal, but they are never in any particular rush to beat you. At any given moment, you can do whatever the fuck you want to do. Get in a little demo derby, maybe wreck an opponent, then explore and smush some pedestrians to gain some points, and then get in another derby with your new items. Chill and relaxed Demolition Derby is a vibe I never thought a game could hold, but alas, here it is, I'm playing it now, and I fucking love it. A simple game session, wrangling with the game's dumbass AI opponents mixed in with the ultra-violent police and goofy power-ups, means almost every car interaction is a clippable moment. Notice how I have thus far described everything this game has done well, and not what it has done poorly, and that is because I am about to tell you. As you may have surmised from the thesis of this essay, the vehicle handling in this game is bad. Biblically bad. Apocalyptically bad. The man has come around bad. A steering input is not telling the vehicle to turn, it is rather suggesting that it pivots in that direction. The vehicle will act like a child on a slip-and-slide during the 4th of July. The direction you pivot the vehicle at the start of your turn will get you somewhere close to that direction by the time you decide you are done. What all this means is that you crash. A lot. However, Carmageddon is not a precise game. If it were a traditional racing game, it would be worse than dog water. But Carmageddon is a sandbox demolition derby kind of game. Every combat encounter has such a wide variety of variables, from what car you meet, the location you're in, the items you picked up earlier. The solution to this equation of combat only becoming more complex by how you are never quite in control of your vehicle. I normally don't want to be the guy that says the bad controls are what makes it great and every negative review doesn't understand the game, but actually, the bad controls are what makes it great and every negative review doesn't understand the game. Imagine doing those bizarre platforming moments in a Soulsborne game. You are never 100% in control of your character as they perform jumps and actions that the character movement was never really designed to do. Nevertheless, it's exhilarating to do these for the exact reason they are. Now, take that same logic and apply it to Carmageddon Max Damage. There is an item I want to pick up, but it's surrounded by mines that will fuck my shit up and down and sideways if I hit them. I have no idea if I will succeed, but the excitement makes me try anyway. That is the magic of the bad handling of this game. You just never know what nonsense it will get you in, and what nonsense items it will force you to use. To balance a game where you are in complete control of everything is quite difficult. Too hard and it's frustrating, too easy and players might skip it as it provides no challenge. Entering around in Carmageddon, who knows what's going to happen? The game has scripted levels of nonsense, but without anything occurring off the said prescribed methodology. One such example would be when I'm getting bumped and pushed around by this other car. They could wreck me if they dumped me off this cliff, but luckily I'm a bubble-blowing baby and float myself away from the trouble. The pickup items shaped as barrels could give you something good, like a comical anvil launcher, to something dumb, like a giant chain ball you can swing around. You never know if what you are picking up will harm or hurt you, and you never know if you are actually going to pick something up in general, as the handling, as previously described, is so jank that you might just end up careening in a completely different direction altogether. Vehicle destruction is also suitably crunchy and not realistic in the slightest. Cars get smashed, squashed, sliced and diced, crashed and cracked in such a vast array and variety of manners. You'll lose wheels or maybe even have to drive on half a car. Although you can also easily just spend some points to repair yourself. The cars you select are also just rather awesome, simply put. All the vehicles have corny names with grotesque drivers matched with unique handling properties. Any weapon you see on a vehicle is not for show. It's usable. Spikes will poke pedestrians, big tanks are unstoppable forces, and cars with the Bodiciers will pop opponents' tires. There's even a car with a giant fly swatter type of weapon on it, but all the said contraption does is just zap nearby peds. Whether it be through the previously mentioned classic Karma mode, a traditional demo derby, a standard death race, or the doofy-ass ped-killing event, there is no shortage of game modes, just as there is no shortage of play stages. For there are quite a lot of arenas. I can only show a small sample within the video, but all provide both a unique aesthetic as well as an unusual environmental hazard. The traditional city map is rather vanilla, but the other stages have odd physical structures and environmental hazards that really hone in on the whole Soulsborne platforming I'm bringing up. Trying to be very careful driving up ramps so as to not fall off only to be ramrodded from behind is but the joy of Carmageddon, or maybe the anguish of Carmageddon. I will be upfront and honest and truthful about the fact that this game is not for everyone. It has pacing that ranges from intense car combat sequences to dead zones where you're just driving and exploring for items so that you may return to the fray. It has difficulty that is entirely dependent on what vehicles your opponents have and match times that wallow within the said pacing and difficulty spikes all the way up to 30 minutes. For 30 intervals, cycled at 1 minute, you could constantly range from doing nothing to something, collecting to crashing, dying to defying, only to get a bad item draw and lose anyway. There really is no other game that compares to this, not even something like Wreckfest, Twisted Metal, or other car combat games. It inflates the sandbox while deflating the high-speed action the genre is known for. I, for one, enjoy it, but will others enjoy it? That is but a matter of taste, and such a sensory description is subjective. Going into this expecting Twisted Metal and seeing that the handling of the cars simply doesn't, matched with the stretches of time where you are planning your next move, one can easily understand the retrospective hate. Conversely, is this a good game? I struggle to say yes to that. It is a game for the kind of people who, want a game that offers extreme degrees of creativity with only very simple goals. Win the event. Doesn't matter how you do it. Sift through the bullshit spread out across the maps and just do so. Carmageddon Max Damage was supposed to be a triumphant return to the series, but it did not really receive anything more than a slap on the back and a yingling and a good job, guy. Many reviews that weren't otherwise complaining about the lackluster launch performance would complain about the gameplay, much in the same way I just described, but in a negative tone instead of a positive tone. The game is not designed with the modern video gamer desires in mind. It is designed as an HD version of the original, experimental 90s PC game. I did not grow up much with 90s PC gaming, so I have no nostalgia for this series, so thus I entered expecting something. But I came out with a smile, simply because this is a no-nonsense take on the idea that everything should be nonsense. A chaotic game where everything is intentional, even the ass handling. Would I recommend it? Only if the things I said entice you. Just by looking at it, it might be hard to immediately enjoy Carmageddon. Yet by playing it, that is where you'll know where the fun is at. Looks are superficial. That is by definition. And I would know. I like the way things look. See this shiny object? Purchase this shiny object. Game trailers will often hype themselves up showing visuals, simply because gameplay can only be described in hyperboles, verbiages, and "it plays just like this" comparisons, which are all difficult to discern and could just be lying. But your eyes often never deceive you, so pretty visuals are often what brings hype. Yet, too often, there is more to a game than a pretty face, and in the unfortunate circumstance, it's for the worst. And there is no better game with a clash of spectacular visuals and abhorrent gameplay than Modellista.
3, 2, 1, go!
Modellista is the best looking racing game ever made. There. I've said it right here at the start. Sim racers can piss and moan for ages that their particular game looks best. But you see, they're wrong, because I'm going to make the bold statement that exact facsimiles of reality are boring. The digital space has a near endless array of methods. One can create an interactive play area, and yet for some reason, there is an ever-growing, ever-burgeoning, and loud group of people who also want to mimic the reality they exist in, and yet simultaneously want to escape from. That is true irony, for I have looked at the definition and determined it as such. Modellista is a racing game that takes the bold approach of being whimsical and colorful with its aesthetics, and comes out all the more better because of it. Cell shading in video games, at least nowadays, is often considered the easy way out in a sense to create charming and good-looking visuals when compared to Goliath AAA games that release alongside them. One would think that with today's titles being made with hyper-realistic graphics, with ultra-resolution textures, cell shading is a newer development style to compete. When one is reminded of cell shading, they think Borderlands 2, and that came out in 2012, deep into the PS360 era. I, too, held this belief that cell shading was a more modern development style, until I read this GameSpot review of Modellista from 2002, and the very first sentence is, "Had enough cell shading yet? It certainly seems like it's the graphical trend." And then the reviewer remarks on games such as Okami and Jet Set Radio, all bangers with an equally banging art style. Cell shading, then, is nothing new, but it certainly stands in greater contrast to more realistic games now than it did in the early 2000s. There is one way reality exists, but otherwise an art style is an art style, and it can be done however one sees it appear before them in brief flashes on a canvas. And my, Modellista has cel-shaded style that is done right. Good art is timeless, but even then, any art critic can date an art piece by the way the art was put together and at the topic at hand. Gran Turismo 4, no matter how well crafted it is, nonetheless dates itself by the detail of the cars and the tracks themselves. The car models look good, even when cranked up to high resolution, but the way the sun shines upon them, the way the interiors have no model, and the at times sparse detail on the outside of the tracks, will firmly date this game as something coming out in the mid-2000s. Modellista, however, is timeless. The inherent simplicity to a cel-shaded aesthetic, matched with the bright colors and exaggerated smoke and lighting, gains Modellista a look, a timeless look. Even here, gazing up at the footage revealed before you, having any emotion other than joy seeing these tiny caricatures of cars driving around must simply mean that you are no fun, and must be avoided just like everyone else who plays sim racers with unpronounceable names. The way the exhaust slightly vibrates and shakes like a happy dog's tail, the way the brake discs heat up when stopping, the representative lines of speed flashing by a vehicle. There is a look and emotional feel to this game that must be experienced. Even moving through the menus is an equal joy. Listening to an announcer excitingly say random words that sound cool, flipping through these menus with not a dark color or serious tone to their name. A shot of your customizable garage with your customized car slowly panning around. Hell yeah. This is the vibe I search for in video games. Or at least one of the vibes. I enter digital worlds to see things normally not experienced in a daily grind of commutes, gossip, and kerfuffles. I am here to be challenged in both my skill and interpretation of ideas and objects I have previously held, and Modellista achieves that goal with no aces in a sleeve, just confidence in its own hand. A variety of fun cars, existing in a charmful, colorful world where one guy is just very excited to see you do well in a race. The only nagging thing holding this game back from being one of my favorites is that Modellista, despite its visible charm, is the single most disappointing game I have ever played. There are two versions of Modellista that exist. The original Japanese release, and the worldwide release. Aside from extra cars and tracks in the worldwide release, the biggest difference is the handling between the games. The original Japanese release is very fast with grippy cars that accelerate rather rapidly, but the AI cannot simply keep up in the slightest, turning the game into an easy baby mode. The US version, for some reason, made the cars slightly slower and nuked the handling so drifting occurs on almost every turn, but not a fast drift, no, a slow drift with dramatically frustrating speed loss. What's worse is there is no consistency to the handling unless you really jam on the brakes to slow a turn, and going from 200 to 90 miles per hour just for an off-ramp exit is a real vibe killer if I've ever experienced one. The initial easy solution to this problem is just to play the Japanese one. The menus are mostly in English and the language of the car is universal, so there is not much you are missing out on with the flavor text. But I already told you that the cars in that version of the game handle like they are on rails, and unless you use the hard-level AI in the free race mode, you will find that the actual, single-player racing can be rather easily achieved while drunk, high, or quite possibly cross-faded. And to me, that is almost worse. A racing game applies there will be a race, not, a blowout every time where all you do is just hold the right trigger and tilt the stick every so often while blazed out in a half-focused autopilot driving mode. The worldwide release has an aforementioned borked handling, which does make it discernibly more difficult, but at the cost of driving enjoyment. Also, the Japanese release does not have any of the American or Korean cars, and unless you are some kind of deranged individual who imports normal cars from Japan just because they are right-hand drive, the Japanese version is not the complete Modellista experience. What you are stuck with then is two imperfect experiences. One with tolerable handling but intolerable easiness, or one with intolerable handling but mildly more interesting difficulty. However, even picking one, playing further into the game reveals many other quirks and features that are in no way fun or even desirable. First off, the single-player championship mode is short, which in of itself is not a problem. I enjoy short games as it means I can then play more games in less time. I took my time doing every race imaginable and building out a car for every racing season or whatever, and then even then, my playtime came out to around 5 hours. In that time, I raced on every track in the first 45 minutes, and my god, these are some of the worst track designs I have ever seen. There are only 6 tracks in the original Japanese release of this game, and 3 of them are highway loops with incredibly long straights. 2 of them are downhill drift tracks that don't feel any different from one another, and then the only good track is a whimsical rendition of Suzuka, which in the championship mode, you will only race on once, at the end. While there are reverse versions of every track within a very short period of time, you will realize that you will be racing on either a dark and mostly straight highway course with 90 degrees on either end, 2 downhill tracks that are either inhospitable in the worldwide version or too damn fast in the Japanese version. Astute viewers will also realize I said that the worldwide version has new tracks. Yet, for some inconceivable reason, incomprehensible to any sane individual, Capcom added 2 oval tracks, which raced in an even more boring way than the highway tracks. meaning that out of the 8 tracks in the worldwide version of the game, only 1 is actually fun to race on. 2 are tolerable. 2 are straight boring, and the others are just a hazy blur of driving in Tokyo at night, sometimes in the rain. Daytona Dreamcast has 8 tracks, but those 8 tracks are well designed, each offering a unique challenge that requires almost an entire relearning should you select any of the reverse or mirror variations. The handling model in Modellista is not very challenging to master, regardless of the version you select, and once you get somewhere comfortable with them, you can easily autopilot these games like it's nothing, which is not the type of game I really enjoy these days. To add even greater insult to injury, there is a bonus track, unlocked after beating the Garage Life single-player mode. The Tamiya Kakegawa Circuit. You know, Tamiya, the brand that makes RC cars. I have no problem with RC cars. The only 2 I built and own are actually Tamiyas, but the fact that this circuit has turns and curves and can only be driven in an admittedly cute and quirky RC car-looking race mode, antenna and all, is almost insulting. It's like they knew that they could make, at the very least, more courses with turns and curves and, create a challenge, but instead they just thought, you know what, fuck it, add another highway loop, but in the dry instead of the wet. The poor track design also impedes the creativity of car builds. The majority of cars are unlocked for free at the start, and there are many good choices here, some silly cars I like to see. However, these silly cars are almost useless because the vast majority of tracks are geared, figuratively and literally, towards high-speed cars. Pick a Skyline GTR at the start? Congrats, you've already won the game. Only on the downhill, or for the very last race in the Suzuka, will you actually need a car with grippiness. All in all, Modellista is a poorly balanced game. It is heartbreaking for me to say this. Every word gives me pain to my soul, but Modellista is not a good game. It is an excellent piece of art. That is not contestable, inarguable, a triumph in the digital representation of the automobile. I certainly would want to see more games look like Modellista, and there have been attempts, but none compared to the level of detail and sincere love that went into this game's art design. If only the same amount of love went into its handling and track design, which are so poor, so lackluster, it always leaves a sour taste in my mouth. I will continue to try and play this game, not out of sincere love, but maybe out of some hope that one day the tracks will be better and the handling will be updated to match. Yet, that day will never come. All one can do is hope that Capcom, or someone, makes a game with this exact level of visual style and flair to bring people in, but also makes gameplay mechanics robust enough to make them stay for a while. I cannot genuinely recommend this game to most people. As for the discerning few who enjoy digital cars, it will not be a pleasant experience. Yet, at the same time, I cannot dissuade someone from trying it if they already have it set in their mind, because looking at this game is an experience on its own, so powerful one cannot help but try to see it for themselves. Yet alas, all they will come away with is the same amount of heartbreak I achieved by acting the same way. So then, is it actually worth playing a racing game with poor handling? One could say there are 4 categories to decide such a thing. Categories created by my own objectively subjective opinion. Firstly, in some games, that's a firm no, like Fast and Furious. In most cases, a bad racing game will fall into this category, where the vehicle handling is so poor, any other positivity about the game is negated. Many a budget racing title on the PS2 and beyond are going to have this problem, although my most other notable example is not a budget game. Sega Rally Revo on the PS360 has an incomprehensible handling model that people tell me is good actually, but I cannot decipher it. Very slidey cars, but also very spinny, not much drifting. It is actually one of the few racing games that actually make me noticeably angry to play. The handling pisses me off that much. I do not know what the attempt was here, but it did kill any further effort by Sega to make more racing games. It is only more painful by the fact that the arcade release of the game, Sega Rally 3, has a handling model much more in line with old Sega Rally games. But why that was not chosen to start, I have no idea. In another corner, some games need the right equipment or certain tips and tricks to enjoy, like Daytona USA 2001. Many home ports of sim racers are like this, such as Project Cars, which when played on a pad is pretty bad, yet playing it would no longer make you mad if you just buy a wheel, which I won't do. The hotshot beckons me. That being said, I will continue to play Daytona USA. Using the handicap strategy with a pad still gains me a difficult and yet satisfying driving experience, all taking place in a happy world with a vibe I fuck with heavy. God, I love this game. Third, some titles may have bad handling, but it's, kind of sort of the point anyway, like Carmageddon. Just because you are in a car does not mean a sleek and spry machine is what you are controlling. The handling must match the environment, bringing that up again. And Carmageddon is a crashy game. And to best match that, inconsistent handling to cause more crashes and chaos is the best way to amp up the fun. In a similar twist to this concept, I shall say Motorstorm fits into this bad handling on purpose category. I'm going to get a lot of shit for that opinion, but I like Motorstorm a hell of a lot. I've played all of the games, but the way the vehicles handle annoyed me a lot when I first started. All carry an unnecessary level of weight that, when matched with the precision that initially seems required for the tracks, one would almost believe that the handling is bad. Yet, upon reflecting and remarking, I've almost come to respect the way the cars handle in Motorstorm. The shorter shortcut routes in that game are almost always the most tricky and narrow. It will also gain you the faster lap times needed for victory. Should the handling have been tighter, the difficulty would have been lesser, and one thing any viewer of my essays shall learn, I enjoy difficulty, and Motorstorm hits the right spots with its handling model you are only ever just barely in control of. Finally, there are the select few where it may be worth suffering through them simply because their potential is something that needs to be analyzed and mourned over what was lost, like Modellista. The only other game I believe fits in this category, to my knowledge, is Fuel. This is not a good game either. Handling is bad, and the environments are dead, figuratively and literally. Yet, this game has one of the biggest open worlds ever, and the ways the map accurately and to scale creates geographic features, as well as creating a general vibe of being a lone motorist on the planet's last knees. There is an allure to this game that keeps drawing me in despite the glaring flaws. There are other bad car games with handling, of course. One may be screaming at the screen as to why I forgot this incredibly notable game with poor handling. But these 4 games seemingly cover most of what category such an issue can fall into. Alas, my time is not a whore, and I can only suffer through so many bad games I initially picked up believing they were good. Although I seemingly here have picked out a list of 3 games I enjoy one way or the other, and just one I straight up disliked. Although in my never-ending search for a car game with unique vibes, gameplay diversity, and/or storytelling, I've been led on some deep cuts and dark paths, looking at shit you ain't never heard of before. It is but my mission, then, to relay these titles to you, for your pleasure and information, so you may one day pirate their files online and play for 10 minutes before realizing I am just completely full of shit.